Afternoon, everyone. So our Twitter handle is NeuroScience, just to put that out there. And I'm going to be presenting consumer neuroscience, neuromarketing. So maybe quite nice to take questions. Hope I can see everyone as we go. It's going to be a little bit more interactive. Also, there's a lot of content. So if you have something you want to ask about neuromarketing, please do. Just interrupt me and we can discuss it. Okay. So just giving you an introduction to Consumer Neuroscience 101, Neuromarketing 101. What is neuromarketing? How many of you have heard about this field? Just a bit of a show of hands. Some of you. Okay. Cool. We used to, when we started our presentations, we'd say this is a fairly new field. It's actually quite established now. It's not that new. It's probably about 2 decades old, and it's really matured now. And overseas, in the States and in Europe, it's not seen as an alternative to traditional market research approaches. It's seen as quite a mainstream approach, especially for many big companies and agencies, etc. So what is neuromarketing? Neuromarketing, well, if you look at traditional market research, generally speaking, you have these two large kind of silos or groups. You have your qualitative research methodologies and your quantitative methodologies. From surveys to focus groups, big data's come into it as well. Neuromarketing positions itself a little bit differently. So we know that, this is just a famous saying from David Ogilvy, consumers struggle to self-report. So if you ask them about their experiences or how they feel about a particular brand, product experience, or if they watch an advert, and then you get their self-report information, there's a number of biases that creep in. Maybe I can try a little experiment if you guys are comfortable doing this, and I know it's just after lunch. Does anyone want to tell me, how do you feel right now? Full. Okay. Maybe I primed you. I just said after lunch. Okay, full. Anyone else want to venture forth? How do you feel emotionally? I'm a psychologist, so this is what I do a lot. Anyone else want to say something? Content. Sorry, what was that? Drained? Okay. Does anyone here feel nervous that I may point at you and ask you how you feel? Some of you. Because I'm asking a question to the audience. So that's something you're probably not going to self-report very easily. So if I start saying, I'm actually going to ask one of you guys how you feel, you're going to feel nervous. If you're in a focus group, you're not going to say that. So when neuromarketing comes in, is we actually look at implicit data, so information that you can't really acquire through a survey or asking someone in a fairly straightforward way. So in a couple slides, I'm going to show you some of the technology we use that comes from the clinical sciences, the neurosciences, and the field of sort of biological psychology and psychiatry, I suppose. So neuromarketing is different, and we can talk about our sample sizes as well in terms of getting good statistical power. It is a science, and that's a great thing. We want our research to be able to be replicatable, and there's a lot of rigor that goes into these studies as well. So we do laboratory research, and we also do in-field studies as well, kind of semi-ethnographic research, which I'll show you guys. So as I mentioned, we're looking at implicit data. So you can think of that as like the unconscious. It's tapping into decision-making that a person's not really aware of. Okay. Or your emotional state, because you're not aware of your emotional state. And we know that emotions drive decision-making. They form quite an important key part of how we make decisions day to day. Over here, just to point it out, consumer neuroscience, it's a multidisciplinary field. So we do a lot of work at universities, mostly in the Western Cape, because that's where we kind of based. We do a lot of our research here in Johannesburg. Our clients are mostly here. But we have a team of different people, from biomedical engineers to psychologists to marketers, salespeople. It's like a whole group of people, even creatives. We rely on like different people's mindsets, approaches, pools of knowledge, etc. So this is just a little bit about us, who we are as NeuroScience.
Consumers don't think how they feel. They don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. Emotions drive consumers to act, think, and feel. So how do brands ensure they're connecting with consumers emotionally? Over 90% of our decisions are influenced by factors outside of conscious awareness. NeuroScience quantifies these emotional and cognitive aspects of the consumer experience. We enable brands to find better ways to ensure these experiences grab attention, drive emotional engagement, increase memorability, and ultimately influence behavioral intent. NeuroSense optimizes retail experiences, online user experiences, and product experiences, as well as advertising and marketing communications, store design and layout, and even product design. Using biometric technologies, NeuroSense provides insights that are unbiased and actionable by measuring consumers' implicit subconscious responses. This helps brands to truly understand what is going on in the hearts and minds of their consumers. Emote your brand with the science of neuromarketing. NeuroSense is the only full-service consumer neuroscience consultancy in Africa. We are leading experts in conducting cutting-edge scientific research in developing markets and informal trade economies. NeuroSense. Consumer insight quantified.
Thank you. It's a bit of self-promotion there, but just to give you an introduction to who we are. Yeah, thanks. Are there any questions at the moment? Yeah. So just a bit about, skip right past that. Okay, so these are just some of our clients, and we've done some, actually quite a few studies in the user experience space, and I'll show you those case studies towards the end of the presentation, like what some of the outputs look like and what are the things we do as well. So, yeah, I'm going to go through our technologies. So we use headsets. These are electroencephalography headsets. They're mobile. They use Bluetooth. They're quite easy to set up, and we get an idea of the individual's emotional, we call it valence, their response to whatever the stimuli is, whether it's an advert. We actually have people walking around in-store experiments. We have larger headsets as well that we acquire from the University of Stellenbosch, and these allow us to get more sensitive data in research. Those tend to be more laboratory type experiments. We also use functional near-infrared spectroscopy. So we are doing a brain imaging study at the moment, but these are like mobile brain imaging devices. They're quite new. There's 10 years in NIRS, it comes from the clinical space, and allows us to get information about the frontal lobe activity. So that's in decision-making. And then we do have access to Cubic, Cape University's Brain Imaging Center. We can do brain imaging. We're doing a study now on smoking cessation with a PhD student, and we're looking at negative advertising. This is a fairly expensive approach, but we're lucky in South Africa, it's cheaper than doing it overseas. Then we do facial expression analysis, and we look at the core facial expressions. These are culturally universal. So if you've seen Lie to Me, it's similar to that. We can get that data. We do mobile eye tracking. This is for like in-store user experience studies, where we have someone go into a shopping center. Sometimes we give them particular tasks, otherwise the ethnographic, they're recruited outside the store. This is desktop eye tracking, and it gives us information about where a person's looking, pupil dilation. We can generate heat maps. We also do virtual reality eye tracking. We can create mock-ups, a mock-up store, product design, this is perfect for, and we can also track information about the eye in that. And pupillometry, this is something we're very, very interested in, is pupil dilation. And we combine it sometimes with this device, which is GSR, galvanic skin response, which gives us an idea of a person's emotional arousal, how the level of emotion elicited. We also do facial myography, so we could put electrodes on a person's face, which also gives us a level of emotional arousal in that individual. And that's a more sensitive measure. Sometimes we combine it with other emotion measures. And then we can also do verbal analytics for like call centers and that kind of thing. We can look at the intonations in a person's voice, extract mood states, and we can also see if someone's like maybe passive aggressive, etc. So there's a whole host of biometric technologies we have available. Sometimes we ladder these technologies up. So we may not do one. We combine a couple of them, depending on what the research question is and how we're helping the client. So this was a study done by Nielsen Consumer NeuroScience. They probably the biggest consumer neuroscience agency in the world. They bought NeuroFocus, and they very interested in, if you're going to do a consumer neuroscience study, does it have any effect on ROI? Like, you're spending quite a bit of money doing these studies. Is it effective to do it? And they've got a lot of really cool data and research, and they look at the effectiveness of these various methodologies. This was actually on advertising research specifically. So it wasn't looking really at user experience per se, but they found that facial coding's not that effective when a person watches an advert. People watch quite passively. It's better for other kinds of studies. And you've got self-report information in terms of effectiveness, and then laddering all the way up to EEG, which is fairly effective. I think it was 62%. And then when you start combining these things, you have more sensitivity. They're even more effective. And the idea is to combine neuromarketing with traditional market research approaches, like surveys, etc. Then it's even more effective. And you can see that at the end, the kind of neuro plus self-report data. Because you get this other layer of information you may not get from the neuromarketing studies. So we still rely on some questionnaires, or gives you that extra granular piece, like bits of information. So if you're interested in reading a bit more in this field, you'll come across a whole lot of literature, and I'm happy to share some of that with you. Some of the earlier work spoke about this buy button in the brain, that there's a buy button. And if you find the buy button, great, fantastic. Or if you get activations in the brain, if you're doing a brain scanning study and you find the right activations, then you know your brand is hitting the mark, or the adverts kind of in specific areas where the advert's playing, maybe where there's a brand placement or something like that, and you have activations in the brain, fantastic, you've hit the buy button. And this was seen in the original neuromarketing study, a brain imaging study between Pepsi and Coca-Cola. They put these individuals in this scanner, an fMRI machine. They had them test Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and they looked at activations in the brain, and they weren't that different. And then what they did is they introduced brand association, and they did it it was in the States, and there was higher the brand health of Coca-Cola was stronger than Pepsi. And in introducing the brand, they activated an area of the brain called the ventral striatum. It's a dopamine-rich part of the brain. I don't know if you know about dopamine. They call it the reward molecule, sometimes the pleasure neurotransmitter. And if there's dopamine activation, it means that, oh, that's great. There's reinforcements in the brain. The person's probably going to seek out that stimulus. And, well, that was probably true in that study. It was a groundbreaking study, but beep, that doesn't always mean that's the buy button. So you've got to be careful. There are a lot of myths in neuromarketing. Some of the original authors in this field, it was very new, but a lot of things out there about, if you find this piece of data or information, it means you've hit the buy button. And there is no buy button in the brain. So you can get activations of this particular area of the brain. So in our study on smoking cessation, this is a reward area. Sometimes we're rewarded. We have dopamine surges where something is bad for us, and our brain needs to be rewarded to get away from that thing that's bad. Like, you shouldn't have more of that. So what's really important is context. And especially, we're very interested in emerging economies, and how do we actually use neuromarketing in these kinds of spaces. We have multiple languages, multiple cultural groups, etc. But context is absolutely everything in interpreting the data in these studies. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you guys to a couple concepts, some things that are probably a little bit counterintuitive, but maybe useful to understand, especially in the digital space. And these are things we focus on when we're conducting our neuromarketing studies. So the first thing, decision making. This was just pretty cool. It was a study done like almost 30 years ago, where they placed these individuals in a brain scanner. And in these scanners, you have this little box they put on your chest. And you're asked to make choices between things. Could be something you like, maybe something you don't like, and then you choose. And then they ask the person to say when they're going to choose. So, okay, I'm choosing, and then they click the button. Or they just click the button. And what they found is that a person was deciding before they were consciously aware of it. Does that make sense? Okay. And it brought into question this idea of free will, but I'm not going to go, we don't have time to discuss that. That's a whole other discussion. But economists are very interested in this as well. There's neuroeconomics, behavioral economics, about how we make choices and how we value choices. And we know that most of our choices are automatic, they're heuristic. How many of you guys think you're making a lot of active decisions when you're shopping at the supermarket for groceries? At the end of the month, or 4 times a month, I don't know. All of us shop, yeah, if you have children or whatever. Yeah, you make active, concerted decisions when you're shopping. Is that with most of your choices or some of them? Some? I mean, I've kind of given it away, I think. Yeah.
I think it's
some?
automatic.
It's automatic, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. Would you guys agree, or? Yeah? Yes.
I don't know, I would think that if I'm going there, I would kind of know what I want to eat, and I would pick up the specific pieces. So I guess I would like to believe that we do,
Yeah,
but probably we're not.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good point. I mean, look, we influence by a lot of things. When you're there, you do know what you want often. And we say a person's operating in a more heuristic space, like an autopilot. I mean, it's not that you're not aware, and some of those decisions are more consciously determined, but our brain is a very energy-hungry organ in our body. It uses between 20 to 30% of your overall body, kind of, whether it's oxygen and glucose and stuff. So it needs to conserve energy. It doesn't want to expend a lot of energy all the time. So it operates on this kind of heuristic level. Heuristic means shortcut. And emotions are, in a way, I know it sounds horrible, I'm being very clinical about it, but emotions act as a way to, they're shortcuts. You enjoy something, you seek more of that out. We say it's appetitive. That's how we talk about it as psychologists. You're appetitive for something, it's enjoyable, you want more of it. If it's noxious or bad, you're going to get away from it. So emotions really influence us. We'll get to a really cool slide in a second about that. Another thing about decision making, this is something you'll come across quite a lot. Has anyone read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow? Have you read it? It's quite a read, eh? Yeah, it can get tedious, but I highly recommend it. Very, very important book. He was a Nobel winner in economics a couple of years back. Quite groundbreaking. He came up with this, we call it a dual process theory of decision making. There's a couple of them. This is probably the most influential one, about how actually we all decide. We have 2 systems, brain systems. There's a system 1, and system 1 is primarily active. It's that heuristic system. It's more emotional, it's holistic, it's intuitive, you make decisions quite quickly. And then sometimes you operate on system 2, and you can see these 2 little blue dots in the front here. So this front part of our brain is really important. We call those your frontal lobes. I took out all the brain slides because we don't have time to get into all the brain anatomy and physiology. There is a lecture we do run on that, but this frontal lobe part we call it the executive functioning part of the brain. And it's involved in when you kind of access your memory, how previous experiences influenced your decision-making, it gets accessed, that information's worked through. Emotions come from, we call it a precortical space, underneath all the gray matter, and they also go to the sort of frontal lobe and uses all that information to execute a decision. But that's slow. Logical, reason-orientated encodes it can be quite abstract. It's not the languaging part of the brain, but language. It needs language to kind of make sense of things. I hope I'm not being. Does that make sense? Some people, some people actually are quite indecisive. They get caught up in system 2. So if you're at a restaurant, you want to order something on a menu, and you're like, "Oh, should I get this? Should I get?" You can sometimes get really caught up in that, and your intuition goes out the window. I think we all get that sometimes.
TV.
Okay. Before I play this, sorry. So I'm going to play you a video clip by a famous neuroscientist, a guy called Antonio Damasio, and he's going to talk about some patients that actually have damage to an important part of the brain that's involved in emotional functioning. And what's I think quite cool about this video is he describes why emotions are really important. He gives a theory for how emotions act or serve us in making decisions. I'll let it play, and then if you guys have any questions.
For it, TV. The world is thinking.
One of the most famous patients you had was a fellow named Elliot, who was a very successful person, suffered this damage, and whose life went down the tubes, basically made a series of terrible decisions. Another case that has always fascinated me, the scene you describe in one of your books, one of your patients who also has trouble making decisions, and you're asking him at what point should we schedule the next appointment, Tuesday or Wednesday? And as you describe it in the book, he spends, I think, 20 or 30 minutes saying, well, Tuesday has disadvantages, Wednesday has disadvantages, unable to make up his mind.
Right, exactly. And that is a very illustrative example, because it shows you, on the one hand, that the cognitive abilities, the ability to manipulate data and to make analysis of costs and benefits in a very cold way is maintained, and people can still do that. Well, but the thing I most liked in these patients, when we asked them about restaurants, and this was really quite remarkable. And they said, "What restaurant do you want to go to tonight?" And said, "Well, we could go to this one." And they said, "But I take it that this restaurant has been rather empty recently, so that's probably a bad sign. It's a sign that the food may not be so good. On the other hand, it's true that if it is more empty, we're likely to get a table, and therefore we should go there." But then, and the thing will go on endlessly until you really feel like pounding on the table and said, "Well, get real and choose." But the reason why they can't choose is that they haven't got this sort of lift that comes from emotion. It is emotion that allows you to mark things as good, bad, or indifferent, literally in the flesh. And it is that kind of emotional impetus that they are lacking. They cannot conjure up, for a given situation, an emotional state that would decide them in one direction or another. And of course, this is something that we all can relate to. We're constantly being swayed in what we do by just a little teeny change, something that comes, for example, from our past experience with a certain kind of situation. But what we remember from a previous situation that is like that is not just the facts, and not just the outcome that it may be good or bad. We also remember whether or not what we felt was good or bad. And this is something that people need to understand, is that when you are making decisions any day of your life, and of course the options you make are going to produce a good or a bad outcome or something in between, you do not only remember what the factual result is, but also what the emotional result is. And that tandem of fact and associated emotion is critical. And of course, most of what we construct as wisdom over time is actually a result of cultivating that knowledge about how our emotions behaved and what we learn from them.
Any thoughts about that or questions? Yeah. So, I mean, we have this folk psychology of either you make just an emotional decision or a rational decision, but in fact they're quite combined. When we do our research, we find in some recent user experience studies we've been doing, you kind of move between system 1 and system 2. So there's emotions happening at the same time as this reasoning that's going on. But we do find when a person's more heuristic, there's a bit more activation in some emotional centers of the brain. Whether we're doing an EEG study, we can pick it up. Whether we're trying to pick it up also through eye tracking and the galvanic skin response, because that picks up a person's emotional arousal, and we can look at the pupil at the same time, and then we can estimate the level of emotion at that particular point, or if the person's more cognitively engaged. Anyway, so emotion's really important, and it is a difficult thing to investigate very easily because we self-report poorly on it. We're not that accurate at cognitively reporting. Sometimes we are, but not always. And emotion works. So this was also a study done by the RPA data bank on advertising campaigns again. So this is more from the advertising space on the effectiveness of emotion when they use a strategy that either employs more kind of factual information or information that is engaging an individual on a personal level, on a kind of emotional level. And then they have ways of scoring and measuring that. And they found that there is an update to the study, but they found, because this was quite a large study, the sample was quite big, an emotional approach outperformed a purely rational approach. And this is kind of a 31%, I think, over like a norm distribution of like kind of an increase in effectiveness over either a combined approach where the strategy for that particular thing was either emotional or rational. So I think what they're trying to illustrate is that emotion can be quite effective. And I think we do need to consider that. How we're moving consumers or clients, how are we appealing to them also on an emotional level? So linked to emotion is attention, because emotion helps guide attention. Okay, what are we going to pay attention to? And these days, with this kind of swell of information and information overload, attention is huge. I'm going to introduce you to something called the attention economy, which again brings a lot of psychologists and economists together. Because if you have a brand, you're vying for space, for informational space versus competitors on all levels. So it's really important to be able to see what kind of impact your piece of marketing communication is having or user experience is having on attention. How are you moving attention? You guys know what attention, this may sound like a stupid question, what attention is? Just the average, paying attention. You've heard of this, Sorry? Focus, focus. And you've heard of the idea of paying attention, right? It's like a resource. You only have so much of it. I can give you guys 4 digits. Let me try this. 4, 7, 1, 3. You can repeat that back, right? Easily. Cool. Okay, if I go past 7 or 8, do you think you're going to be able to tell me what those are? Can we try? I don't think I'm going to remember. Okay, well, let's try. Okay, 4, 2, 5, 6, 8, 3. Okay, I should have gone longer. Okay, but there are some mistakes. And if I go more, then it's even harder, right? Would you agree with me? So there's something called working memory. We'll use a computer analogy. So working memory is like your RAM, and it's actually only bytes. And then your long-term memory is like your hard drive. So your brain needs to pull information from long-term memory into working memory and then utilize it. And we use this word also psychologists. It sounds a bit horrible. It's called chunking, information chunking. You can chunk about 6 to 8 pieces of information. If you're really quite a genius, you can do a little bit more than that. I mean, I've also from my psychology space, I've met individuals that can reach levels of 14, 15, and their IQ scores are incredible. So working memory relates to that. But the general population can only hold so much information. I'm going to, guys, pay attention to this. This is just, pay as much attention as you can. Ready?
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
You guys notice some of the changes there, okay? So does anyone know what that's called? Sorry? Subliminal? Yeah, we don't do that anymore much. So it's change blindness. It's a really cool mentalist, a guy called Darren Brown. If anyone's interested, he's brilliant. He's amazing. So he does a lot of change blindness experiments. And that's a problem of working memory. So it's an illustration that you can only hold so much information. And you're also only focusing on, he's drawing your attention. So there's also another very cool change blindness experiment where the guys playing basketball, and they ask you to look at how many shots the guys make. And there's a guy in a bear suit that walks through. Have you guys seen that? Yeah, I've seen it. I've completely ruined it for you. Now you're going to look for it. There are loads of those on YouTube. Most people don't. They're like, guy in a bear suit? What are you talking about? And then you watch it again and you see the guy in the bear suit. Because you're watching for the guy shooting the hoop. So that's change blindness. It's a working memory difficulty. Your working memory is constrained. And we're literally living in a world with social media. It has taxed our working memory. And we also know that we have less working memory. I'll show you in a moment. Where emotion links in with this is that when we do our research, we know if there's the right emotional quality, you can engage the right kind of attentional demand. You can have the consumer pay attention to the right, or the information that you would like to convey to them, and you can create the right kind of emotional engagement and tone. So this is very psychological. It's a basic model of attention. So you have, I'm just going to teach you something. So we often talk about a stimuli. A stimuli could be almost anything. It could be a specific aspect of the advert. It could be brand placement. It could be the whole advert. It could be on a website. So a person's navigating a website, and there's certain button placements, colors that you're using. All of these things become stimuli, navigational patterns, etc. So you have an input, and that's sensory. Person's often watching something. So we're looking at a lot of visual information most of the time, but it could be other senses. It gets in, first it goes into short-term memory. And the thing is that going to be encoded, we use the word encoded, into long-term memory? So we talk about awareness, then perception means you are consciously processing it. It's being perceived, it's kind of in the forefront there, and everything else is pre-conscious. Often I say, can you hear a sound of an aircon, but you can't hear it here. If there was one, that would be pre-conscious. It's not important for you. Then you may make a decision. You act on it. There's a kind of decision response. And that's also important because that affects whether something's going to go into long-term memory. So if someone's busy navigating, also if they get frustrated, they may remember something, but that may be encoded in the wrong kind of way. And there's response execution. So the person's thinking, where do I want to go? I'm looking for a particular product, or I need assistance. I'm looking for the help section. And then they execute on that. And this thing's cyclical. So it's a constant flow of information. But what we're looking at is where it moves down into this kind of long-term memory. And that's really important. And these are the areas of what we call the attention resources, which get very constrained quite quickly. You can have a lot of sensory overload, but it's going to get constrained internally at these points. You know, you can only perceive so much information. The more you multitask, you'll see in a moment, you're really super depleting your attention resources. Are men better at multitasking than women, or are women better at multitasking than men? What do you guys think about that?
Women.
I definitely think women are better than men. But I mean, we're bad at it anyway. Would you guys agree? Actually, no one's really good at multitasking. Are you good at it? Are you doing lots of it? Yeah, we almost have to. But it is, we know it's not, when you multitask and you're doing something, don't think of it as you've got 100% resources and multitask is 50-50. It's actually worse. It's like 40-50. 40-40, sorry. There's this kind of fallout. So we talk about this attention economy. Okay? Attention, there are ways to improve this a bit, but it's not an infinite resource. It's fairly flat, right? Then you've got information. We live in this world of info overload. How many websites are out there? What's on the website? How many competing brands? It's really, really hectic. People are consuming information much quicker. If you on YouTube and they're looking for information material that's more than about 5 minutes, boom, gone. You've probably lost them. And they're really interested in that piece of information. So yeah, in the past, I mean, there wasn't as much competing information. I mean, if you're looking at all these very cool TED Talks about, well, there's machine learning and AI and how these things can process information, and we're limited. But if you look at like how much information is generated this year compared to last year, it's completely exponential. And how much information has been generated, I think in the last 8 years is more than in the history of the human race. It's quite unbelievable. So there's this exponential growth point, and we're beyond the inflection point. I mean, we're way beyond it in terms of how much attention we actually have. So another thing in attention that's quite interesting to look at is this idea of bandwidth and what kind of sucks up attention. Face to face, if you're sitting and so this is quite an interesting thing, if you're dating or if you're going out for dinner, you do still see a lot of people on their phones, they kind of multitask, but generally if you're face to face talking with someone, you're using up a lot of your attention resources. We look at people's hands, we look at facial, micro expressions, we're processing their voice, a whole lot of information. So that uses up most of your chunks of information. Although we do try multitask. A telephone call, a voice call, about 75% of our attention is used up. Texting, just text, about 50%. Now we're in the world of emojis, lexical information. I mean, if you guys I use an Apple device, just updated, there's all these nice new little emojis. So we're speaking in emojis. Because that uses up less, we don't want to expend this resource. If you read some NeuroScience books, the guys that study attention, there's a famous guy called Schachter. He's got this quote that says, "We cognitive misers." It sounds horrible. We don't want to use up that information. We don't purposefully do that. It's actually something we do unconsciously. We want to direct our attention where it serves us most. And that's often in things that we know we're going to get an imminent reward. We like to get rewarded quite quickly, and that's where we're going to point our attention. And I think there are things these days where we're trying to change a bit of that, because it's not healthy to do that all the time. But this bandwidth thing is quite important, because this is really low bandwidth. It really takes less information. But it's also important because it says something about how we process information. Visual stuff is, in a way, more attractive, more powerful, faster than words and language. In a way, you'll see that in a moment. So this was a piece of research done, it's just a summary from it. I think in the year 2000, what was the average attention span? About 12 seconds long. I think when 2013, it was about 8 seconds long. Now, what's that, 5 years later? Where is it now? Maybe it's less than 8 seconds. I mean, there's this depletion, and this is very controversial for a lot of behavioral psychologists. Is this because of social media and the way we're consuming information? Are there like genetic factors? Are there educational factors? What are we don't really know fully. A lot of people are hypothesizing that it is the way we consume information. You know, we just have a limited... There's an interesting book, I think it's called The Age of ADHD, or The Age, I think it's something like that, or ADHD Society, where this individual says we're all a little bit attention deficit, and how the diagnoses of ADHD are just blowing up. Anyway, so this is an ad that shows how they try to use this idea on YouTube, because on YouTube you only have a number of seconds, and if you don't hook someone initially and you don't really get them involved, they're going to click the skip button. So I just thought this was quite a cool example of exploiting the minimal attention space. So billboards, just another thing we look at as well. So this isn't, I mean, you're driving in a car, so you're already, it's autopilot, system 1, or if you want to use that way of thinking about it, and you pass a billboard, it's like 5 seconds. You're probably not going to get much there. It's way... So we've looked at this as well. We've actually built a billboard virtual reality experience. I can't really show you guys that here. And then we're trying to work out how many words, and we've done this on mobile as well. So I'll tell you about our chat bot work that we did as well. How, because you can get if someone's working with a chat bot and they're reading too much, they kind of already petered out on attention. So you want to have the right amount of information. And it also has to feel like someone's talking to you. But you can lose someone very quickly. I mean, that's effective, 4 words. So one of the things we look at there is salience, what hooks you. Okay, so you've got attention, the emotional space. Salience, what stands out, okay? And this could be, or we often talk about visual salience, but sometimes a word can stand out, or other sensory experiences can stand out. And if we're doing market research, we want to find out like what is more salient, what is less salient. If we're looking at user experience design, we can even look at buttons, we can look at almost anything visual that the person's navigating and test to see which elements are salient and not, and modify those, optimize them. But, so let me show you your brain, how it processes visual information. So this relates a bit to attention. The first thing your brain will see is color. Okay, I'll show you that in a moment. Your brain processes color first, and you receive information in your eyes, crosses the optic chiasm to the back of your brain. So this part of your brain is visual. We call it the occipital lobe. We are very visual. A large chunk of grey matter is dedicated to visual information. It's not to say with other sensory experiences, smell, hearing, feeling, are not important. They're super important. But we even, there's like overlap with vision and other sensory information. Anyway, so the first thing you do is you see color, then you see form, is the next kind of thing. And then you give them what we call semantic, there's a sort of attribution. They're linked with deeper information, and then past experience comes in as well. So memory is activated, etc. And this happens in about 400 milliseconds. I can't show you the whole thing, but how you identify something visually, it's 400 milliseconds, half a second long. You've gone through that process. And you can't really look at this if you're looking at navigation on a website and someone navigates down and they click, or it's a mobile app and they're looking at and they're going to change app pages. That can happen, we've seen it happen in 2 seconds, 1.5 seconds sometimes, or 5.5 seconds. And then you ask the person, how was that for you? They can't recall that. They've skipped through it. And often that first landing page is super important on whether a person has positive appeal and how they're directed and guided. It's super, super quick. So I want to give you some principles we look at. So if we're doing a study as well, and then we want to give you feedback, we want to make sure that you're optimizing the right way. And these are psychological or neuroscience principles on how we do navigate things visually. And they affect both the attention systems of the brain, but also we would look at emotion. So the first thing is called the visual hierarchy. Okay, and I've kind of already alluded to this. We process color first, then the texture of something. So we see textures next. Then shape will come in, then the direction of shape, and then size. So size is far slower than the rest. I don't think I have a slide in here but reading is very slow. So if you're reading text, compared to seeing an image of the same thing, like if you read the word even dog, and you see a picture of a dog, you've processed that, even though it's got color, form, texture, etc., far faster. I mean, dog is short, but you've got to make, there's a brain translation process. So another principle is something we call visual hierarchy, so the arrangement of things. If things have a hierarchical structure, and sort of almost a flow, a shape of flow, or they're directed, people tend to move faster and more effectively through that information, whereas things that may tend to be less distinct, or, there's no particular visual hierarchy. So we've done this on menu design, but also in user experience. So we've had a couple guys give us like menus, and we've looked at the menu and helped them to kind of make that menu more impactful, and so I don't have examples of those case studies. Another one is the fusiform gyres, or the read faces. So we've seen this, it's in every one of our studies where there's a face on a website, it's the thing that people look at first, is human faces. We hardwired to look at faces. Even an object that may not, it doesn't have to be someone's face, but it can be an object that looks like a face. 2 eyes, a mouth, very, very powerful. There's more fixations. So fixation is like how much you focus on something, much more than anything else. And we've seen some studies, and some guys actually use that, where you have a face looking at you and then you're just looking back, because a part of your brain gets hooked by that. Or you have a face looking at something and you can direct it to a particular area of interest or a call to action. But you also got to remember your context. I'm giving it away. I'll show you a study where, I'll get to it actually, where they tried to use faces and it wasn't very effective. Spatial processing, some guys talk about the way we navigate information. Primarily Westerners navigate or read from left to right, but other cultures don't, and you've got to be very careful of that, because it does affect navigation on a website. But also website structure and context can change navigation flow. We do find that there are optimal areas of placement. So the one, often it's the top areas of websites, but we have done research where that's not always the case. And on mobile devices, that can be radically different. Like how people scroll upwards, but scrolling right to left can have a massive impact in keeping attention, guiding attention, finding information. Yeah. Just the last principle. Yeah. Are these dots on the top, are they going right to left or up and down? Just scattered. Sorry? Static. Okay. Yeah. Do some people see it going? Yeah. I mean, yeah. If you place them, so the idea of Gestalt priming or proximity is if you place those dots closer to each other like that, then a person reads them across. If you place them closer together, does that make sense? Like that, horizontally, then they read them going down. And then similarity as well, things that look similar, like these appear to be going across with the little squares. So we use these ideas to affect visual navigation. Arrows as well, I don't have those slides here. Something that looks like an arrow, people look to where that's going. Draws attention very fast, very, very quickly. Another thing that I've got is movement. So movement can also, if something's moving, it can draw attention. So movement's very, very powerful in drawing attention as well. So I'll get into some case studies quickly with you guys, and then if you have some last questions, we can end there. But just to give you an idea, we look at everything from ideation, mock-up designs, we consult on that, to we can do like pre-implementation studies, all the way to something that's already been executed actually. We can look at like from brand health to how well a particular marketing strategy is working at the moment, or how well a website's working, and then inform you of particular optimization things that you could implement to improve on it, etc. So we work with our clients. It depends what problem they're coming to us with. We're quite diverse in how we look at things. So yeah, and as you saw in the video, I mean, we've got a lot of different focuses, market research focuses, but because this is digital, it didn't come up. We're looking at web UX. So I'm going to give you just some of those case studies now, just to quickly go through that. Before I do that, yeah, this is just a lab setup. Okay, so you can see this person is wearing the EEG headset. That's a 10-channel. It's easy to set up. It's robust. This is medical grade. We've got the eye tracker at the bottom of the computer. We've got a little webcam as well, and you can see she's wearing the GSR on her fingers. So we're also picking up a level of emotional arousal. That's like almost my colleague calls it a lie detector. It's kind of like that. It picks up your heart rate, it picks up sweating in the skin. So it's your nervous system, how activated your nervous system is. And this is our mobile device stand. So we can look at apps, chatbots, etc. We said that we have a person looking at that. And there's other ways we can do this as well. So we can do in-the-field experiments with mobile glasses as well. But this allows us a lot of experimental control. Okay, so we've done a lot of work with Liberty. We have permission to share just a little bit of this information. Sorry, I couldn't blind you. I was clicking this thing. Yeah, so we looked at their chatbot, and we're part of their sprints, their development sprints, and trying to enhance the user experience with the chatbots, working with their teams, the development teams, their marketing team, and everything from like the way their emojis looked for the chatbot, to languaging, to how much languaging, to flow, etc. And this is just one very minute sample of an output of like, yeah, this is just a heat map. And they wanted to see, even on the smallest, like, well, which one of these is going to work better for us? And yeah, I mean, we did all of that for them. They wanted to know, how do we make this thing as best as possible across a number of cultural groups, etc. So yeah, it was an eye tracking, GSR, and then we also did some EEG electroencephalography for them as well on some of these, on their chatbot development. Just a sample output. So we looked at the levels of emotional engagement and then their cognitive responses to this as well. And this may look really confusing, but this is kind of a sample output. We can give that to a client, and you've got all these streams of information. What we rather do, because if you read that, your eyes kind of glaze over, and that doesn't really look very meaningful, we give you a report that tells you exactly like what elements are working better or not. And we break down the entire user journey from the beginning as they open up the app, pain points. We just break that down in like a PDF document that like takes you through. Also engaging with like what are the things that you really want to find out about this. We also did work a while ago with Telkom. This was on their website. So, and that was to deliver on like the e-customer service. And they had a lot of UX pain points. So we also worked with their user experience team. And I mean, they've changed the website a lot of times. So this is really long ago. And they wanted to find out about their optimal user flow, where people are getting stuck, where they're getting frustrated, and what are the influences? What are the visual influences? What kind of visual influences can they use? And we streamlined that dramatically for them. We increased their positive emotional engagement, and we wanted measurables. So we were quite keen to get measurables from clients as well. Like, how is this affecting your business, and are we making an impact? That's super important for us. So they gave us some data. One of the things it's hard to say for sure, but they said that the call centers dropped by 1/3 after implementation of some of these strategies. We'd love to get more information. But an example that they're happy to share, they used baby faces to elicit attention. But on their business, we divided their customer base into business users, home users. So we stratified the sample, not just into LSM, but we stratified it out into these various user groups. We found that actually backfired because it was out of context. So business users actually had a negative emotional response to babies. They didn't really want to see babies. So that marketing strategy wasn't useful for them. But it may have worked for like home users, etc. And I mean, that was a big sample for a neuromarketing study. It was close to 300 people. So I'll skip that. Let me just show you. This is a sample output. What you can see there is the orange is his GSR, his emotional arousal. The green is the valence. So valence is the evidence for an emotion. So when it's increased, there's an evidence for negative emotion actually on this one. And then when it's down, there's kind of probably no negative emotion. So again, that can look a little bit confusing. Sometimes our clients do want to see this, like where those pain points, we can highlight it. We like to give them aggregates. This is one individual. We like to give the entire sample. This is another output. This is actually, we just checking web app for Burger King, and these are some other outputs. You can see the pupil dilation. That's the bottom blue graph. Again, you can see joy. There's not much evidence for joy in Mark. Sure why. But his valence, the other green line, so that probably just looks like a little bit of a jumpy line. We'd extract it out and actually norm it and look at like the full sample. So one person's really not a lot. And then we get other outputs. We get heat maps. You can see the little 1, the 2. So where do they look first? How many fixations do people have? We can get kind of all these pieces of information to build our report decks. Do they come back to particular areas that the person's interested in? How quickly do they fixate on something? And then we get all the emotion metrics as well. So just to give you guys a little bit of just a small taste on what the case studies are about, because we don't have a huge amount of time. I think we have like 30 seconds for a question. Yeah.
So you spoke a lot about our working memory decreasing just because of the times that we're in. If you had to take like a stab at like a future thought, how do you think that will actually impact us in future in terms of like from an evolutionary perspective? So if we've been born into an era where we possibly had normal working memory, but now it's decreased over the past 3 years, and I'm sure it's even worse right now. How do you think future generations will treat that? Like, how do you think we're going to be behaving in a way?
So I don't think we fully know. There's some very cool research on that. So we know that information technology changes our brain. So the brain scanning studies that show, they basically score how much do you use social media, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and then they track changes, and then also people have been exposed to these technologies, they track them longitudinally, and it literally changes key areas involved in attention, etc. And part of those brain changes, functional changes in the brain, they have an epigenetic component to them. So what that means is that when your brain changes, there's gene expression that changes. Your brain, the DNA, the way DNA is expressed actually changes, and that may have an effect on future generations. Because not only do you pass on genetic material when you have children, you pass on epigenetic information. That may sound like a bit of a weird word. What is epigenetic? So epigenetic is protein information, certain gene variables. I don't have time to go into it, but it actually affects the way genes will be expressed. So the idea is that this is probably going to change our brains and the brains of quite close generations to us in future to come. We kind of in the age of Google brain. I mean, you've all heard of that. If you don't know something, you just quickly Google it.
Yes.
Yeah. We don't want to rely on, like, think about it. And our mind often goes blank. It's easier just to... And now you've got AI coming in. I mean, Siri's just getting cleverer. And we've worked with guys in Tel Aviv who have assistant apps who are becoming super smart. So you just ask your assistant to think for you. I mean, it's going to get to that point where your assistant will just help you out with information you can't remember. Anyway. So yeah, it's a cool, interesting question.
Yeah, thanks. It actually makes you wonder, like, what the role of education is going to be. Like, what is it that we actually have to know and be good at if you can just ask something?
Yeah, exactly. So I have time for one more question, then have to end.
Quick one would be, would this also change the way, especially the epigenetic, will that change the way we learn? Because currently the traditional way is to repetition, write it down, and that's how it goes in the long memory. Or would that change in the future? Will it be YouTube tutorial the whole time? What would it be?
Yeah. I mean, education is definitely changing, and we're a little bit behind. I mean, I work with guys in South Wales and other universities, so they don't, this is a bit of a tangent, they don't do tests anymore because they don't feel it's a relevant way to assess learning. It's all assignment-based predominantly. These are all postgraduate courses. So that's falling away, and there is more kind of e-learning now. All universities, I think, around the world are looking at learning via like shorter tutorials, going online, having some face-to-face. But I think the future of education is definitely going to be different. I mean, I'm involved at 3 universities, and I mean, at UCT, where I'm from, they had a big fright with the protests, and then they tried to move everything online. And what it actually did is got a lot of the educational specialists to rethink about and research how we...
Yeah.
And they found it actually an effective platform. Students prefer that than face-to-face. So I think there's going to be massive changes in the way we educate and
quick one
methods.
For me to understand better. What is today referred as long-term memory and short-term memory, if you had to time frame it?
So long-term memory, you're able to recall after look, they're different. Theorists give different ideas of it. I've got to end now. Time's up. But I'll quickly answer it. Our view is anything longer than about 30 minutes is probably long-term. But it would be about a day later with other theorists. Is it staying in long-term memory? And then you have capacity to recall. Short-term memory is momentary. It's a couple minutes.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.